Okay. Okay, we can start. Hi, everyone. So welcome to the Horror Advocate episode 2. Just to get an idea what this is, if you didn't come to like my first reading, it's essentially a horror anthology archaeology project where I'm taking a look at horror films through like a social reading lens. So this episode is called The Gold Standard. So I'm just going to talk about the gold standard for horror, like how I see it for certain subjects. So we're going to talk about slasher films. We're going to talk about pregnancy horror. We're going to talk about, just one second. Okay, I'm having trouble with my sound, so just bear with me like 1 second.
We'll figure it out.
Okay, I think like I fixed them to some degree. Okay, maybe it's still going. This is just, I'm having like the worst technical experience that I could possibly be having right now. So I'm sorry.
Ask them if they can hear you.
Can anybody hear me? You're gonna have to text me to let me know because I don't have a chat in here.
Chat, I'm sorry.
No one's in here.
Should be recording.
Okay, I'm just gonna go. So disclaimer is that just to let you know, like some of the topics are going to be rough, but I don't show any photographs and I'm not going to play any video, maybe in the future, but not anytime soon. So I wanted to start off with a fun fact, which is just something I like to do at the beginning to get everybody a little more familiar with like horror and like the history and sort of like what goes on in that area. So a fun fact is that so the movie The Mask from 1994, the Jim Carrey movie, which like people love. So this movie was originally supposed to be a horror film, but because Jim Carrey was like a major star and because he could do so many different things with his body, they were able to like cut the budget for a lot of things. So they changed the angle of the movie to something else. So that's just a fun fact to know that that was supposed to be a horror film originally and it was imagined that way. And that's, you know, you can kind of see those elements still there that they tried to keep, but they had to like move it into another genre that they thought would be a little more successful for him, but also like even for themselves. This is something that isn't that uncommon in Hollywood. There's the horror community in Hollywood is almost like a clique. It's kind of insular because the other like the rest of Hollywood doesn't have the same amount of respect for that genre. So they tend to like work with each other a lot of times, and it's kind of like its own little cult. So I thought that would be like a fun fact for everyone to know. So the gold standard. So let's start with pregnancy horror. I personally like pregnancy horror. I think it is some of the best that you could possibly create because it is very reality centered. I mean, like it's something that happens every day. I don't know what the actual statistic is on what the minutes are and like when a birth happens in America, but you know, it's common enough motherhood that and parenthood that these films can be extremely effective. So Rosemary's Baby, which was from 1968, is arguably the most important in-depth interrogation on motherhood in America that's like ever happened. I mean, even today with all the movies that have come out since, I still watch that movie and I just see such a about how our culture sees mothering, how it sees motherhood, and how it sees like how it perceives a woman's reaction to motherhood or to a desire for motherhood and things like that. So that movie is really good. So I'll just read like the little opening snippet that I wrote for this. So this is about Rosemary's Baby. Roman Polanski's film Rosemary's Baby in 1968 remains the single most in-depth interrogation of motherhood and reproduction. Rosemary and her husband Guy Woodhouse move into a beautiful new apartment in New York. Guy, a struggling actor, spends most of the film concerned about his career and the impending birth of his first child. Coincidentally, Rosemary is not a concern of his. Her womb, however, is. So, and for anyone who's never seen the movie, like there might be spoilers. I mean, there's going to be spoilers throughout these episodes, but for anyone who's never seen the movie, they're a young couple. They move into this new house. He's trying to get his career off the ground as an actor in New York City. So that's already a complication. You know, they're in a place that she doesn't have any family. So her only connection to the outside world, to anything really, is through him. She discovers she's pregnant and things sort of start to unravel from that point. And I mean, you can even see before she finds out she's pregnant in the film, you can see like all the subtle messages that are going on about, you know, the control over women's bodies and, you know, just the way that they even treat her after she gets pregnant, you know, the very like the coddling, the like, you're all around me, you're on top of me, telling me what to do, what to eat, don't pick that up. You know, oh, don't read any books. You know, they're very much like, don't read books. Like she doesn't need any outside knowledge. Like all her knowledge should just come from some intuitive sense, as if like her need to fully understand her body and this experience is some form of, you know, it's like some form of like negativity or something. So it's like, oh, you're exaggerating, don't read books and things like that. So Rosemary's Baby like really centers on the pregnancy like as this force in a woman's life more than anything. And in the final reels of the film, you know, is, you know, she ends up having the baby. And in those final reels of the film, she thinks it's died. So she's under the impression that her baby died during childbirth. And then she starts to hear this crying through the wall. And, you know, she knows it's her baby. So eventually she goes to, you know, seek this out. And that's when she sees her baby for the first time. Now, the audience doesn't see the baby. So she sees the baby for the first time. And you are just left with her reaction, which is pretty much like a huge draw of breath. Like she pulls back and she asks what they've done to its eyes, because it resembles its father. Now, in the film, the father of Rosemary's Baby is not her husband. It's actually the devil. This is also a witchcraft film, which I love. So it's also a witchcraft film. So she is under the impression that something has happened to her. She wakes up from this horrible dream she has where she feels she's being assaulted. And her husband makes all these excuses like, oh no, you're just having a bad dream. Like it was just us, like it's fine. And she just doesn't feel right. And as this pregnancy continues, you know, she's like, she looks terrible. She's like losing weight. She has cravings for like raw meat. And I'm talking like completely raw, like out of the package. She's just acting irrational and not normal. And she knows it. So when you get to that final reel of the film and she sees the baby and she confirms that in fact, he's not the father of the baby. And then you do find out, you know, he did all this so his acting career could get off the ground, basically sold his wife to the devil for this. So it's a pretty intense film, but it's also one of the most beautiful films I've ever seen because of the landscape of New York. The shots of, all those famous buildings. It's a very like realistic filming that goes on for this film. And it's not just because it was made in 1968. I mean, there were still films in 1968 that, did special effects or, exaggerated sets, other worlds, things like that. And what's so great about Rosemary's Baby is it's a place we all know, it's a place most of us have been, and it's a place a lot of us live. And the marriage even, it's a very traditional, anybody could be in that marriage, especially in 1968. So that's a really great film. If you've never seen it, go see it. And if you have seen it, maybe watch it again, see what else you can pick up. So another film in the gold standard of pregnancy horror that I really, really love is It's Alive. So this is a movie from 1979, which is essentially about like the barbarity of like pharmacology on women's reproduction, which is like crazy because this is 1979 we're talking about. And I mean, you can look today and see how those things are still probably relevant. So the idea of the film is that like this guy has a child, and the child's born, and within the first, like, I don't know, it's probably like 3 minutes, the child like leaps out of the mother and like murders like 3 people in the room. So it's like this baby's like out of control. It's got like fang teeth. It doesn't really have legs. It's kind of crawling with its arms, and like it's not really a complete baby. So there's like that aspect going on. And the actual like thread in the film that's happening is there was this experimental drug that they were giving to expectant mothers, and they weren't explaining everything. Sound familiar? So they weren't telling everybody everything about what was happening. And, so these women were having these children that, in effect could be, metaphors for what was happening at the moment in society. I mean, 79 is, right around the brink of brutality in America in terms of like you really get like the serial killings like really like picked up in America at that time. The late 70s, early 80s, very chaotic moment, very scary moment, so there's definitely that aspect that pushes through of like, you're birthing the chaos you're living in. So it's kind of a call to parenting, to parenthood. What influences are you having? Because it's about, this experimental drug, but you could argue a whole lot of other things could take the place of that drug. Like, how do you talk to your kid? What types of things are you pushing onto your child? What types of things are you like feeding them, letting them watch? How much are you letting them watch? Like all those questions are sort of like played out with this one film. And so it's called It's Alive from 1979. I would definitely suggest you go see it right now. It's definitely got those elements of like comedy as well. I mean, because it was made in 1979. So there's going to be a lot of things that just kind of seem funny, but the general disposition of the film is like not funny at all, because it's also about, a father trying to figure out what to do. So he's like hunting his kid all over the place, and, he tries to protect his child in the end. And it's like that aspect as well. Like, that's still your child and you want to protect it, but like your child is killing everyone. So, it's definitely a really in-depth thought about what it means to be a parent, how far that's supposed to go, how far you're supposed to take that, and just what that really entails, you giving up, changing, altering. So yes, again, 1979's It's Alive would be an awesome thing to watch. So that was a little take on pregnancy horror. So we can move on to the next subject I want to talk about, which is the slasher. So I am probably the biggest slasher fan in the world. I love slasher films. I'm a gore hound. I have no issue with it. I think they're great movies, and I think they're important films, because I think a lot of times the stories that they're trying to tell literally cannot be told in another genre of film, because you would be lacking the realistic nature of what a slasher film creates. So I'm not going to say it's a number one slasher film, but the grandfather of slasher films is Halloween. The father, I suppose you could say, only because of, a couple of years, honestly, would be Friday the 13th. Now, I would almost argue that Friday the 13th is the grandfather of American slashers, because, as I said in my first episode, Halloween is virtually bloodless. Like, it has no real like punch like that. it's suspenseful and it's got great jump scares and it's, you know, a well done film. But like Friday the 13th came in 1980 and it was like, this is what a slasher film is. I think that Friday the 13th wrote the book on what a slasher film is, period, end of sentence. I don't think it gets any more textbook than that. So the original Friday the 13th is really great because a lot of people, you know, don't, if you haven't seen it, then you're definitely going to expose yourself for not having seen it because of who you think the killer is. And that's the great thing about the original Friday the 13th is you could argue that it doubles as a movie, like not pregnancy horror, but about parenting as well. And the horrors of parenting, what you give up, what it rips out of you. Because, you know, Friday the 13th is it's a revenge film. It's all about Jason's mother getting revenge on a bunch of kids because, you know, Jason drowned when he was 13 years old at Camp Crystal Lake because the counselors were having sex instead of watching him. So when they go to open up the camp again, his mom basically goes on a spree to basically get back at them and be like, you know, to not let this happen to another child. I mean, granted, we understand that this is like, you know, something else, but that's the deeper motivation. So that happens. She is the killer. So she kills everybody in the film. And when we get to the end, she talks about like her grief. She has a whole speech at the end where she talks about, you know, her grief, and she is like imagining his voice, and you can really see this moment where she kind of breaks. And it's like, yes, she's the killer and the villain in this movie, but she absolutely is in torment and in pain because her child has just been killed. And, you know, I know it's like he wasn't killed, but negligence is a crime. People go to jail for negligence and people die. Okay. So, you know, he was hurt. And she felt that the only way to deal with that was sort of to be the full stop on it ever happening again. So that whole aspect, the revenge aspect, you know, this happens at this moment, then we have this period of time, and then we come back to the same moment. Those things are very textbook American slasher devices. So yes, Friday the 13th is great. Now, Friday the 13th part 3 is probably arguably as important as this one, because Friday the 13th part 3 is where you get like the Jason that we know today. Friday the 13th part 2 is Jason as the killer, but it's Jason as a killer, and he wears, instead of the hockey mask in the second one, he's wearing like a potato sack essentially, and like one eye hole cut out. And then they changed it, and the third one is when he finds the hockey mask. So that is the epitome of Jason Voorhees. That is the creation of Jason Voorhees, in my opinion, is actually the third film, not the first with the, you know, legend, and not the second even where he's like active. It's the third one where he becomes the character that we know. And that those staple things, like the idea of a character having those staple items, like, of course, yes, we have Halloween, like I said, but, you know, the hockey mask is iconic. This iconically relates to him. So Friday the 13th is definitely up there, and Friday the 13th part 3 is the first time you get to see Jason in action with the hockey mask. So if you've never watched past the first one, or if you only saw Freddy vs. Jason because that's a more recent one, I would just suggest maybe getting into some more of like the other Friday the 13th films, because they are really, really good. Another really awesome slasher film that I wanted to talk about is The Town That Dreaded Sundown. And I really love this movie because, one, I believe it came out is this another 79? This might be 1979. And then I know they did a remake in 2014, which I absolutely loved. Now, the cool thing about this movie is it is loosely based on crimes that took place in Texarkana, which is like basically the border of Texas and Arkansas. And it kind of like is its own little world, because you can easily be in one place or the other. So there were actual murders there, and I believe it was like the 60s. And so it's loosely based on that, but the film itself is not like a play-by-play based on a true story adaptation of what happened in Texarkana. So it's basically, it's another really like fascinating film, but it has the same elements of like, it has a revenge story, you know, kind of like cleaning up the past, righting wrongs. It has those same elements in it. It also has a staple that, you know, you can't live down, which is the final girl. There's one, you know, lone girl in the film who, you know, is the only way you're gonna make it out and the only chance you have to make it out. But I think the great thing about The Town That Dreaded Sundown is that they really like played with that element of like, is this true and is this not? And we've seen that before, right? We've seen that in its most extreme form, in its most like potent form, which was Blair Witch Project. That is the greatest example in history of how you work that out, how you take the idea of this being based on something real and make that like about as real as it can be, even though this is not a true story. So Town That Dreaded Sundown really played that up. It's got some great shots. Like it's just a movie that the frames are really good. The shots are really tight. There's not a lot of extra in A Town That Dreaded Sundown. And that's what I love about it is movies so often like maybe extra shots, extra scenes. Like they knew how long to be on the road. They knew how long to show like the killer standing here versus here. It's a very technically made film, both of them. Both films are very technically made. So I would definitely suggest checking that out if you're a slasher person, or if you want to get into slashers. That's a really great one. Yeah, it's definitely got its tough moments, but in terms of comparing it to other slashers that I personally like and enjoy, it's really not that bad. So I could definitely say that that is something that you might get something out of. The next one that I wanted to talk about for slasher films was Urban Legend. Now, this is not something that people are going to want to hear or probably believe, but I personally feel like Urban Legend is the quintessential, like, put a stamp on it, perfected, like, formula for the teen slasher. It is perfection. So I know a lot of people are thinking like, what about Scream? How could you say that? Like, especially for the 90s, like, how could you say that? But I think Scream is bigger than that. To me, Scream is like a 2.0. It's like a new model on what a slasher film could be, especially a teen one. So I almost see that as outside of the realm of like just the copy. And I think that the copy, the one that we know today, especially, comes from Urban Legend. It's perfectly stacked with like popular teen actors of the time, or like teen actors. I mean, they were grown people, but they were playing teens a lot of the time. So, you know, like Joshua Jackson is in Urban Legend. Rebecca Gayheart is in Urban Legend. Jared Leto is in Urban Legend. So it's definitely, it pulls you in with that alone, because you're like, okay, familiar faces, which it seems like it wouldn't be a big deal, but horror films are a lot about relating and empathy. So a lot of times that's why you find that horror films are often stacked with like bigger names and maybe like some indie like drama would be, because you literally can't even care in a horror film unless you're sort of familiar. It becomes difficult. So slashers really play on that idea of familiarity. Like, you know, this person, like this person's in your home every week or something, you know, or like you watch Dawson's Creek, right? Like, do you want Pacey to get hurt right now? Like, they very much, the 90s knew how to take that and like ring it for all it was worth. Another great thing about Urban Legend is, I mean, the kills, they're awesome. Like they did a really good job of like lining up the whole idea of like the urban legend with the reality of what would be going on a college campus. I thought that was like really brilliant, especially considering, you know, even in the 90s, like there was so much talk about like the college campus as the sort of vortex. You get like swallowed up and, you know, things happen there that like, you know, once you're outside of there, it's like you couldn't like picture it. So I think they did a really good job of like making the college campus like the most dangerous place you could possibly be. And I think they also did a good job because simultaneously as these murders are happening on the campus, there's an actual urban legend class happening at school that all of the kids are in. So they're like, you know, they're very flippant. They're developing their own feelings about it. And it's very like, oh yeah, like cool urban legend, like let's tell a story. It's very flippant. No one's taking it very seriously. And I think that that element is, you know, cemented better because they have them interacting with it within the film. And it's not just like, we all know what urban legends are, and then there's just some killer on the loose. It's all very tied up. It's all very intertwined. So it's very well done. Also, it's just filmed really well. I love 90s films. I always say that they look really glossy. I don't know how else to describe it. They just always seem like they look better than other movies, even ones that were made today. So just the look of it is really great also. The opening scene of Urban Legend probably ranks within the top like 10, honestly, of all time. That opening scene is legendary. And I think anybody who's seen the film, like, loves that opening part. It's good for the scare. It's good for the like trick. You know, it's a good trick on the audience. It just does everything that's needed in the beginning of a film to get you to stay. So I do really love Urban Legend. So Urban Legend is, ooh, I can't believe I'm going to say this, 1998. So check that out. Okay, so the next section I want to talk about is creature features. And I'm going to try to like go through this one like kind of quick because I could go on and on because I actually really love creature features. So the first creature feature I want to talk about is everyone's favorite like ball of grief, The Mist. So The Mist is probably not only one of the better books that Stephen King has ever wrote, but it's also one of the better film adaptations that has ever been done with any of his work. So if you haven't seen The Mist, like that's a must. You got to go do that like tonight. If you've never seen The Mist, it's just really great. I sometimes have an issue with Thomas Jane, but as an actor, but this is one of the times where he landed it and he nailed it. I believed it, you know, like, so like all of Stephen King stuff set in Maine. So the visuals are really awesome. But what I love so much about this film is I really love like isolation films where things take place in like one room. And so The Mist is about, you know, this town up in Maine and the father and son, there's like a storm and they go to drive to the store to get supplies. This is very typical. This is very common. I would know because I lived in Maine for a while. And you like, you know, a storm is coming, you go and shop for things like very far in advance because things are literally like 45 to an hour away. So they drive down to the store. And when they're in the store, they notice an entire commotion outside. And there's like monsters and stuff. And it's crazy out of nowhere. There's like and there's no explanation. It's like you see the military kind of like passing by the cars and stuff, and then, you know, he doesn't think anything of it, and then he's in the store, and then there's like a lockdown situation, and you know, so what has ended up happening is there's some rip in another dimension, and all these like freak creatures and monsters are loose. And I mean, like, these are some animals like creatures like I've never seen. I mean, they're some of the best that I've ever seen on screen. They're scary, but they're also completely inventive. There's not one creature in that film that I feel like I saw before. And that's a really hard thing to do, especially in the era of CGI. I feel like I've never seen any of those creatures before or since. So it, you know, it's a survival horror film. It's also like a mob mentality horror film, as I like to call them. A bunch of strangers stuck in a store. Like, how long does it take before like the real monster starts to become the people you're with and not so much what's outside? Like, how long does it take before you realize I have a better chance with the threat outside than I do with the desperate souls in here? So that's a lot of what that film is about. Like I said, is the ultimate exercise in grief. If you've seen it, you know what I'm talking about. If you haven't, today, like, do it today. Okay, so I wanted to talk a little bit about Jeepers Creepers. And I think Jeepers Creepers is underrated. I think that it sort of gets just like tossed away as, you know, like an endless series that doesn't really have any point. And I will agree that, you know, they're not exactly all the best films, but the first one is a really good film, I think, especially if you're just looking at the relationship between the brother and the sister. It's like a really good look at that relationship and how that relationship responds to danger. The people and the roles that you assume are going to be taken like aren't exactly what you assume. So that's definitely like something that gets taken away with the film, and you're able to attach yourself in like a different way because you're also mostly only with the two main characters, the brother and the sister. You don't have a lot of interaction with a ton of other people, so you're pretty much like in their world, in their way of thought. The creature in this movie is great because it's a combination. Like, it's almost as if they took something like, it's like what they wish they could have done with Predator, because it's like there's these human elements and this human aspect, and there's this like even like human movement. So there's all this familiarity with like humanity, but then it's like you're not human. And so I think that that's what they were doing with the creeper, but the creeper has personality. And that's what's different about a lot of the other like creatures that creature features, have, is that this is a creature with a personality. So it's like almost a combination of like a predator and a Freddy, because the creeper comes by like every 23 years to feed. So it has like a cycle like that. So it's otherworldly, it's not human, it's not familiar, but it has that element of personality the way Freddy does. Now he doesn't talk, so I don't want to make it seem like it's that much of a difference, but the facial expressions, the body movements, like whoever's doing that work, both the actor and whoever's doing the costuming and the makeup, did a really great job of like giving you moods without vocals, giving you emotions without talking. Like it did a really good job with that. It reminds me a lot of the original Phantom of the Opera, because like in the original Phantom of the Opera, they have CGI, and I mean, they didn't even really have like the mask work that, a lot of us are used to. So what they ended up doing with Lon Chaney is they like pulled his face back with like piano wire. Yeah. So that's why he looks like that in the film. Like that is his face. Okay. And so he wore it back like that. But what they would do is they would film in like stop motion almost. So then it would be like he could work through the scenes emotionally without words, because remember, this is a silent film, so there are no words. You have to be able to emote. And the fact that his face was like, tied up, they had to figure out another way to do that emoting. So they would film it kind of in like stop motion, like, so they'd have him do like one face and then go away and come back and do like another face. And then they lined up the filming so it looks like he's acting through all those feelings. That's a lot of what I feel like is happening in Jeepers Creepers with the creeper. So yeah, I would like encourage everybody to check that out, maybe watch that. I'm forgetting the year it came out right now off the top of my head. Yeah, I can't remember right now, but I want to say early 2000s. So the next two movies I want to talk about, one is Cloverfield and two is Splinter. Cloverfield, for me, I didn't think I'd like it at all. I'm not like an enormous fan of found footage films, but Cloverfield is probably the sleekest, like most studio, like DV camera film movie I've ever seen. It's perfect because it feels realistic. Like they allowed it to still feel realistic with the camera work, but it still feels like a movie because it's like shot so well and it's so clean. Like if you haven't seen it, there's like a scene in Cloverfield. Well, first I'll explain what's going on. So Cloverfield starts off, it's this guy's like going away party, and then all of a sudden, it's set in New York City. Then all of a sudden, like things are just blowing up, people are screaming, running, like things are just going down, and they're all of this is just being recorded on this camera. So you're with this camera wherever you go. You're kind of just like it's almost like you are the camera. It's like someone's carrying you around basically and like going like this. So there's a scene where they're all outside and they're trying to look and see what's going on, and all they can see in the distance is like things flying, like the tops of buildings coming off, like people running and screaming, like cars flying across, like over the top of buildings, like all types of crazy stuff. And then all of a sudden it's like this huge, it looks like a huge ball. It just sort of like is coming into frame, and it's huge, and it lands, and it's like the head of the Statue of Liberty. And that moment in the film was just so perfect. I remember being like, wow, that was it, because they did two things with that moment. One, they pretty much like yanked on like the American soul, because this is New York City and this is a piece of New York, like sitting in the middle of the road, head of Statue of Liberty. Like it's a 9/11 horror film without question. So you have that element going on where it's pulling on those emotional feelings. So it makes the movie really tough to get through at points, because you start to feel that chaos. And for some people, they're remembering that because this really happened in a lot, in some ways. So all that is happening. And the whole goal here is, for whatever reason, he needs to go get his ex-girlfriend. He just can't leave her. Like they broke up or whatever, or it's like some girl he likes something and he has to go get her. So the whole movie plot is basically about him taking everybody with him to go rescue this girl and everything that happens to them along the way. I would definitely suggest it to anybody, especially if you don't mind found footage films. If you're somebody who like can't take that, I understand. But if you can, Cloverfield is a really, really great found footage film to get into. It's not like a lot of the other ones. So the next film I want to talk about was Splinter. Now, this is probably my favorite creature feature movie ever. It came out in 2008, and I believe actually, I should have thought about this for the other ones, but I think Splinter is free on Tubi TV. Yeah, I should have thought about that for all of these, but next time I'll remember to say where you can find these if they're free on streaming. So yes, it came out in 2008, and it's about a couple, man and a woman, who are on a camping trip. And during this trip, they get kidnapped by an ex-con and his girlfriend. He just escaped from jail, and she helped him escape, and they're basically on the run. They find them, they kidnap them to take their car, and they're like, you're just gonna drive us where we need to go. So they start to drive, and they need to stop at a gas station. So they stop at this gas station, and that's where everything stops. It could arguably be another isolation horror film, because it does virtually take place in the gas station and like right outside. Like after those opening moments where, we get to know the couples a little bit and they like come together, from that point on, you're basically in the gas station or right outside. And so Splinter is like really unexplainable. It's not a creature feature that gives you a lot of information. Like a lot of times creature feature will tell you like if it's an alien, where it came from, what it's doing here, what the purpose is, like all those things become clear. Not so much here. It's otherworldly, it's an alien, and it is like, it's like the equivalent of something that will like eat you, but also become you. So it's like the Blob. So it'll like eat you, but then it'll like take over your body. So like, it's almost like another level of a zombie, because the body is dead, but this thing is like making it move, and it's like really creepy. So if it touches you, if it pricks you, you're gonna start to turn. So it definitely has that element of like also like the infection horror, like kind of mistrust thing with like, did you get bit? Did you get poked? And certain characters getting poked and trying to hide it. And them eventually figuring out that this creature responds to heat. It's like a heat-seeking missile. So that's why, although it has no eyes, it keeps finding wherever they are. Like they can't get away from it. It's fast. It's like it jumps really fast. It's got like all these like skills. It's got agility, and you can't get away from it. And eventually they figure out that the reason you can't get away from it is because it's heat-seeking. So then you start to play with these ideas of like, of like messing with your own life and your own mortality. Like, do I try to freeze myself enough to drop my body temperature so that I can like get to the car and get the keys? Is that even possible? All those things start to come into play. So and then there's like this really great like umbrella story happening throughout the film about the ex-con and how like he's not even really that bad. What happened was a mistake, and like he's actually trying to, like, he escaped from jail, but to do something to make up for why he went in the first place. So getting into that whole thing about like judging people when you by first action, by first impression, which is not always who somebody is. And by the end of the film, these characters are like actually close, when this started out like such a hostile takeover. So Splinter is really great. 2008, I believe, yeah, like I said, that it's on Tubi for free, but I would just highly suggest it to anyone. It's like fun, it's fast paced, it's really good. So check that out. So the last category I'm going to talk about tonight is called The New Frontier. So this is fun because I have had a really great time over like, the last couple years, especially like enjoying like all the new horror movies. Like there was this huge influx, like, because when I was growing up, like, I feel like I was watching a lot of what had already happened. And the 90s is great, but the 90s did not have the same momentous push that, the mid to late 2000s had. So the new frontier of horror like has been, stretched in a couple different directions. One of them is like just Rob Zombie. Like Rob Zombie has completely changed what a horror movie looks like, what a horror movie sounds like, what a horror movie actor looks like, what an actor looks like at all. he's changed the complete landscape of how you make a film, the effort you put into a film, the costuming, the set of a film. He's literally like just put his brand on all of that. So I am a huge Rob Zombie fan, and I definitely defend his work. I can definitely see where some of them are not as great as the others, but I will say this because it's just something you've got to take a stance on at some point. Rob Zombie's Halloween is good. Rob Zombie's Halloween is great. It is awesome. It is not bad. I think people have a really hard time with that, like, original thing. Like, yes, the original is untouchable though. So in some ways, if that is so untouchable, what's wrong with reimagining it a little bit? And that's another thing that we have to like clear up for people. Remakes and reimaginings are not the same thing. Rob Zombie reimagined Halloween. He did not remake that movie. It's not the same plot if you're actually paying attention. It's not really the same movie. He reimagined the original. So I think that's a really important distinction that people have to start making, because they're expecting remakes from things that are not remakes, and it doesn't actually make any sense. So, for example, I would say that I'm trying to think of like a remake that. So, for example, I would say that When a Stranger Calls, that was a remake attempt, and it failed very badly because they didn't reimagine anything. It was like they literally tried to take that movie and just make it in like what did that come out in, like 2009? They literally just took it and tried to make it like now, instead of actually reimagining like how this would fit into the current moment. And I think that is what's so great about Rob Zombie's Halloween, the original, is that he really thought about like, what's my world? Like, how do I take that movie and put it in my world? And I think he did that, from the hair on his characters to the clothes on his characters to the house, everything. It's like he took everything that he grew up with and he just reimagined it into this awesome package that I love. And part of the reason that movie is so successful is, one, Michael Myers is like an unbelievable savage. Like, the original Michael Myers is like not to be played with at all. But this Michael Myers like is, the emotions are more there. I feel like Rob Zombie tapped way more into like the emotional aspect of Michael Myers, instead of just leaving it this like blanket, like soulless mass. Like, he actually tapped into what are the emotions behind this person, because you never hear a word out of the original Michael Myers. I'm talking from the first movie all the way down to the last one he was in. Okay. You don't hear a word from him. This Michael Myers grunts. And I think it's very important to note that. And I think it was a distinct and important decision that Rob Zombie made. I think he made that decision on purpose, because that creates an entirely different character. Another great thing about Rob Zombie's Halloween is he gives us the mental institution, which is something the first film, you know, I know that they leave it out for their reasons. And I think for the first film, it works to be left out. But for this film, I think it was so important that he took us from like this child, this angelic child who had no ill will, no heart, like malice in his heart, nothing, and was literally like driven to becoming like this, like literally pushed into becoming the person that we now know as like Michael Myers, the boogeyman. So that's another thing too. The actor who plays young Michael Myers is fantastic, believable. And you feel awful for this child, because it's not like the first one where you get no window into like what Michael Myers was as a kid or what his childhood consisted of. This movie demands that you understand why we have Michael Myers, not just that we have him, but why we have him. So I do think, you know, I won't lie, Rob Zombie's movies, like, that's not something I'll sugarcoat. Those are extremely brutal films. So I would not suggest to just go do that unless you are fully prepared to do something like that. But I still think that they are, like, I would argue that I see no reason that Rob Zombie's Halloween did not get like Oscar nominations. I don't understand that. I will never understand the just deliberate choice of, you know, Hollywood and the Academy to ignore horror films. But even if we're just talking about like set design, that movie should have been nominated. So if you think you can get past it, or if you like, you know, maybe think like you can just like block it out of your mind once you've seen it, I would definitely suggest watching Rob Zombie's Halloween. The next thing I want to talk about on The New Frontier is like probably my favorite series that's happened in the last like 10 or 15 years, which is Hatchet. So good. Now, Hatchet is 1000% the movie that like has revived the American slasher. And this was written and directed by Adam Green. He also did the movie Frozen, in case anybody's seen that. So if you want to get an idea of like what kind of filmmaker he is, like he can do something like Hatchet and he can do something like Frozen. So he's very gifted because he's got the combination of gifts that Sam Raimi has, and Sam Raimi did Evil Dead movies. So, you know, kind of like the comedy horror aspect, like, you know, the tricks with the camera, like those things are going on, but it's also simultaneously like this very like dark, brooding, like suspenseful, like, you know, dig into the human spirit happening in Frozen. So he has both of those abilities, which I think is like really impressive. So if you're also looking for like a new director to get into, I would suggest Adam Green if you're a horror fan. So yes, so Hatchet series, right? So this is basically, you know, does exactly what we remember as the typical formula. You know, you have a character who is mistreated by the town and eventually like killed because he is different, and his spirit cannot leave the swamp. Also, it's set in New Orleans, which is awesome, 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 because the cultural aspects are really great. Another aspect about this film that's super awesome is it has Danielle Harris, who is a horror movie veteran. She is Jamie Lloyd from Halloween's 4 and 5. Danielle Harris is like amazing. She was also an Urban Legend. She was the lead character's roommate in Urban Legend. So she's, you know, got her horror, like, you know, stars and stripes. Like she's great. And Hatchet is just a really fun series. It's just a fun ride. Like you're having a great time. And like, it's almost like Hatchet goes into that thing with gore where it's like so gory that it's absurd. Like I truly believe that it's so absurd that you can't really even be repulsed by it or grossed out because you know it's not possible. Like you just know it's not possible, you know? So it's nice to kind of like have that lightness to such a serious thing. So I do love Hatchet. There are 4 Hatchet movies, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And the 4th one is just called Victor Crowley. The first 3 are Hatchet 1, 2, and 3. Personally, Hatchets 1 and 2, like awesome. Hatchet 3 is like okay. Hatchet 4 was awesome. So it's strange, but I found that to be better than the 3rd one. So I would also suggest checking that out. So the last thing I want to talk about is Ari Aster, the director of Midsommar and Hereditary. And then I want to talk about Hush. I do not remember who directed it. It is on Netflix, I believe, still. So those are the last ones I'm going to talk about, and then we'll call it good. And don't forget, you can always like email me questions after. You can, you know, suggest things that maybe you want to hear about. I'm all open. So we'll just do these last couple, and then you guys are free to go. So let's talk about Ari Aster in Midsommar and Hereditary, because these are probably, he is and his films are probably one of the most polarizing things that has happened to horror and to filmmaking in a very long time. He is you either get Ari Aster or you do not understand what he is trying to do at all. I love him. I have all his movies. I think he is fantastic. He does what people like to call folk horror. Like you could definitely argue, especially that Midsommar is folk horror. It's a film about a young girl who like she goes off to Sweden with her boyfriend because he's doing some documentary, or he's doing some study for his class. It's like his graduate studies, and so she goes with him to observe this festival that they do. And it's like, you know, it's one of those things where like you think you came on your own, but in reality that was already set up for you. It's definitely about fate. And the main theme of Midsommar is 1000% empathy. And I mean empathy, not sympathy, not feeling bad for somebody, but feeling their pain. Midsommar is about sharing pain. It is about community. It is about the only way to heal is to share the pain. It's essentially the message of that film. And it also has a lot to do with like female rage and how that like isn't something that you want to play around with, basically, because she is definitely, you know, the embodiment of the archetype of a woman. She doesn't she's trying to be nice and agreeable and she doesn't argue with him too much, even though he's doing things that are absolutely annoying to her and outrageous. And, her parents have died and he's not even caring about this. And like, she's acting out all these typical things. And so by the end, when you kind of see her like in her rising moment, it's sort of like a message in the film about like, watch how you treat us. It's certainly what I took away. So I do love Midsommar. Fun fact about Midsommar is that it's filmed in Sweden and it's filmed completely in daylight. And when I got it, I had also just got a 4K TV and I am still trying to deal with the eye problems that brightness caused me. So Midsommar is kind of really special to me because it's like a real life horror film. Like it leapt from the screen and actually like affected my life. So I feel like I have a special relationship with that one. Hereditary is equally as polarizing. People do not understand that film. I think it's phenomenal. Like I'm jealous basically that he wrote that film, that he directed it. I'm completely jealous. The scenes, the acting, like some of the visuals in that movie, like you don't even need sound. You can turn sound off in that movie and sit there. And especially in the last, like, I would say the last like 35 minutes to the end, you could turn off the sound completely and the effect would be just as strong. It's another film about grief and how you work through grief and how grief especially works in the family unit, who takes on what, who handles what, who responds what way. And the like way that, a unit such as a family can sort of like self-destruct from the inside because of these unchecked ways of dealing or not dealing with your grief, your emotion, your confusion, your anger. So Midsommar is awesome. Again, though, extreme brutality. There's some scenes that are just like really difficult, especially toward the end, like I'm saying, but there's ones in the beginning too that are a little like, gut punch jarring. So just, ease into that as you can. But I like think Ari Aster is a great filmmaker, and I think he's going to be around for a long time, and I'm excited to see what else he can do. So the last film I want to talk about is Hush. Hush was also on Netflix when I watched it. And the reason I like this film is because it took something that we don't see that much in horror film. Like, yeah, we've seen it, but we don't see it that much, which is the different abilities in hearing. So of course you see that in A Quiet Place, and John Krasinski's A Quiet Place, the character, like sound is the thing, and one of the characters wears a hearing aid. So it's not like we've never seen it in film before, and then you have things like The Eye with Jessica Alba. Like, so there's definitely stuff like that in a film, but I don't think any other film has ever taken a character who is deaf and like made them so powerful. Like, it's a really great movie. You are like with her the whole time, and the suspense is impressive. Like the way they were able to build that suspense with so many scenes that don't have a drop of sound, like not even like background music, because that wouldn't make sense, right? So it's really authentic in creating that world and immersing you, because there's no way that, you could be as terrified watching that film, or you could be as emotionally invested if you could hear music, because that's not what she's hearing. She's not hearing anything. So you should be hearing nothing. And I think that they made like some really like huge leaps in filmmaking in terms of like representation of people who are deaf or hard of hearing or hearing impaired or have different ways of like different abilities. I think that this movie is sort of like a huge push for more films accepting things like that and giving them three-dimensional life. Another film that gives different abilities three-dimensional life is the Don't Breathe. If you haven't seen Don't Breathe, like, it's great, but also like be very cautious of the end, because I can take a lot, but the end was a lot for me. So Don't Breathe is great because they also do the same thing. The lead character in that film is blind. And I don't think I've ever seen a blind character written that way. There is not an ounce of helplessness written into that character. And so often characters who have any type of impairment are written with helplessness like built in. And there's not an ounce of that in Don't Breathe. So I just wanted to kind of like give an idea of what that's pushing at. And I do think that, Hush is something you can watch whether you like horror films or not, which I like. I mean, I'm not going to say there's no violence in it, because there is, but it's definitely a film that you can watch if you're kind of squeamish about like gore and horror. Like, it's more of a home invasion horror than anything else. So it's not like, there's not monsters, there's not like chainsaws, So, there's nothing crazy that's going to be going on. So I would highly suggest you check that out. Okay, so that's all I had for this one. So not all of those are going to be in the book, but a good chunk of them are. I haven't decided yet. So when it comes out, I guess you guys will see. Thank you for coming. Thanks for working with me through my technical issues. This is the first time that I've streaming this live in this particular way. So I wasn't exactly sure what was going to happen. And of course, I didn't do it early enough, so I didn't test it. That's obvious. So yes, thank you for coming. And if anybody needs anything, you know where to find me. If you want to suggest something, if you have a question, if you want me to clarify anything, if you just want to talk, everyone knows where to find me. So thank you for coming, and I really appreciate everybody. And have a great night. Happy Easter. Happy Sunday if you don't celebrate any.